Hey guys, today I'll be taking a look at the shocking new 2022 governor polls that have been released in the last week. I know I like to use a shocking thing sometimes in my titles, and sometimes people are a little bit upset by that, but today we really do have some very surprising new polls. This new batch of polls from the last few days is probably the most surprising batch of polls we've seen in the last 3 months. Minnesota, Tim Walz up by 18%. However, in most of these races, we're seeing the races to be much closer than expected. I mean, a Republican leading in the Oregon governor race. We also have Kathy Hochul only up by 4% in New York, and also new polls from Wisconsin, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, Texas. I mean, look at these Florida and Texas polls. Democrats are only down by 3 and 4%, and then 2 new polls from South Carolina and Colorado. So some very interesting numbers for us to dive into, and so a lot of polls, so we're just going to get right into it, starting off with the new polls from Minnesota. So starting off with this new Minnesota poll, Tim Walz currently leads by 18% according to the Survey USA poll conducted just a few days ago. And I mean, this really is a pretty big deal. Tim Walz has led by lean margins in the other polls we've seen in the last couple of months. The last poll we saw was from July, and this was conducted by the Scott Jensen campaign themselves. Walz is only ahead by 4%. And so in this race, Tim Walz is the incumbent elected in 2018. He won by 11.4% against Jeff Johnson 4 years ago, and he is almost guaranteed to win a second term now. And this new poll only reaffirms that fact. According to 538, Tim Walz now has a 96% chance at winning his re-election. Yes, his odds did go up significantly after this new poll was released. I mean, 5% from 91 to 96 is a pretty big difference because you are already so high statistically. So right now, Minnesota is looking to be pretty solid for Democrats. I'm actually going to move it to the likely Democratic column. I think it would be impossible for Tim Walz to win by over 15%, but a likely margin of over 5% I think is much more likely, as this new poll shows. Next up, in Oregon, Republicans are leading here by 1% with Christine Drazan as their nominee. Now, Betsy Johnson is a former Democrat running as an independent candidate, and she is really splitting the vote with Tina Kotek. That's why Kotek is in such a precarious situation, even though she's a Democratic nominee in the very blue state of Oregon, a state that Joe Biden won by a very solid margin in the 2020 presidential election. In 2018, Kate Brown won re-election. She was a pretty unpopular governor, so winning only 50% in 2018 in Oregon was pretty disappointing, and so in 2022, she is ineligible to run again. I think that's very good news for Democrats. She really could have almost lost this race if it was a three-way race with Christine Drazan as the Republican nominee. And so in the end, though, Republicans are probably going to lose the state. Democrats are going to coalesce around Tina Kotek. She does have a much higher chance at winning than Betsy Johnson. Independents almost always underperform polling expectations, so even Johnson is at around 20 to 30% support, she's probably only going to win at max around 15%, making Tina Kotek the next Democratic governor of Oregon. I still have confidence that she's going to win, even though her polling numbers really have been pretty abysmal, and right now, Betsy Johnson is making a serious impact on this race. And moving on to New York, we have just as surprising of a poll in a much bluer state. Kathy Hochul only leads by 4% in the Empire State against Lee Zeldin for her re-election. The only saving grace for her here is that this was a Republican internal poll conducted by the Trafalgar Group. But this is representative of just how poor Democrats are doing right now in the state, simply because of the sheer number of scandals they've seen with high-level officers in the last couple of years. I mean, in 2018, Andrew Cuomo was re-elected to a third term. He would have won a fourth one this November if not for his scandal. He was basically hit by a wave of sexual assault allegations and was forced to resign and leave office in 2021. So Hochul has really only been governor for a year now, and at the beginning, she appointed Brian Benjamin to become lieutenant governor. He resigned just a few months later due to bribery charges. He was actually charged by the federal government, and then Antonio Delgado is now the new lieutenant governor of New York, running alongside Hochul. So in just 1 year, we've seen 3 lieutenant governors in New York from the Democratic Party. That's why Lee Zeldin is in such a good position. He defeated Andrew Giuliani in the Republican primary. He, of course, is the son of Rudy Giuliani, and if you look at the polling right now between Hochul and Zeldin, Hochul does still maintain a solid lead, but I think that this race could actually only be a likely Democratic state. I think that Hochul could win by less than 15%, but still, it's going to be a race that she wins. There's no way that Republicans flip the state. If we do look at another Republican poll a few months ago, we did see Hochul only up by 8%, so Kathy Hochul is not in the position that she wants to be, especially considering how blue the state of New York as a whole is. And so I do like to show you guys the candidates before I talk about the races. Let me know down in the comments below whether or not you actually like that. I think that it's much more interesting to talk about these races if you actually know who the candidates are. So let me know down below whether or not you want me to continue doing this. And so on our map right now, I will keep New York as a solid Democratic state, but I am more skeptical in whether or not Hochul will actually be able to carry it by as large of a margin. In Wisconsin, we have probably the closest gubernatorial election of the year, and this poll is a very good reflection of that fact. Tony Evers and Tim Michels are tied in the most recent Wisconsin poll release, both at 48%. So this poll basically shows most voters do have an opinion on these two candidates, and Tony Evers is the incumbent Democratic governor elected in 2018 against Scott Walker. Tim Michels, I think, is a good candidate in this race because he is much more moderate of a Republican. He did receive the endorsement of Donald Trump over Rebecca Kleefisch. However, he is much less pro-Trump than other Republican nominees in states like Pennsylvania or Arizona, and the fact that he is not as extreme makes him a very tough challenger to Tony Evers. Tony Evers only won by 1% in 2018, even though he was running against a Republican incumbent, so it was actually a pretty strong victory for Democrats here, but for him to win re-election, he will have to campaign very, very hard in the next 2 months. Tony Evers is probably the second most vulnerable Democrat on the ballot this November. I have the most vulnerable, obviously, being Laura Kelly in Kansas obviously being a very Republican state, but with a Democratic governor that won by 5% in 2018. So in Wisconsin right now, I'm going to categorize it as a tilt Democratic state just based on the new polls that we're seeing, but really Wisconsin is going to be a very, very competitive election. I can definitely see both candidates winning, and right now the polls do favor Democrats, but polls typically do almost always favor Democrats in these competitive races, and in 2020, Democrats did definitely underperform expectations, with Joe Biden barely winning Wisconsin and flipping it only by a margin of 0.63%. We also have a new poll out of the Sunshine State of Florida. We've got 4 polls from the 1st of September, but starting off with Florida, Ron DeSantis leads by 3% against Charlie Crist. This is a battle of 2 governors. Ron DeSantis, the incumbent governor, now the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican nomination for president. Charlie Crist is the former governor, served as a Republican from 2007 until 2011. So Charlie Crist was a pretty moderate Republican. He was pretty supportive of many of Barack Obama's policies, and so after that, he was essentially kicked out from his party towards the end of his gubernatorial term about a decade ago, and so now he's running for his old job back. But honestly, Ron DeSantis is going to crush Charlie Crist. Ron DeSantis is just too well known of a candidate with too much money in his hands. He has over $130 million cash on hand. Charlie Crist, in comparison, has less than $2 million. And if you look at just the polls, Ron DeSantis also maintains a very strong advantage. He's up by 7.1%. And for Florida, this is a very significant margin. I mean, Trump won Florida by a relatively large margin in 2020, winning it by 3.4%. 7.1% will be a trashing for the Democratic Party. If you look at every single poll, Ron DeSantis has led in all of them. And in 2018, though, we saw that Ron DeSantis might have almost lost the gubernatorial election. He only won by 0.4%. If Andrew Gillum won this race, it would have changed the course of history, as Ron DeSantis would not now be the frontrunner for the Republican nomination in just 2 years. So Ron DeSantis' win in 2018 was the closest race of the year, and so now he is in a pretty good position to win a second term, as he is definitely a popular governor, even though many liberals are upset with what he's doing. Overall, in the more Republican state of Florida, Ron DeSantis is doing a good job if you just look at his approval. According to 538, he has a 93% chance at winning, and so even though this new poll shows a much closer race, I do sell Florida as a likely Republican state. In Georgia, we have a new poll showing Brian Kemp only leading by 2% against Stacey Abrams. This is a complete identical rematch of the 2018 race, where Abrams lost by just 1.4%. It was also one of the closest races of the year. And so in 2022, Republicans are in a better position, and Brian Kemp, as the incumbent, is a popular governor. That's where we're seeing Republicans winning in the gubernatorial election, while they are losing in the Senate race. Raphael Warnock in the Senate election does lead by 1.7% against Herschel Walker. So we're probably going to see the 2 incumbents get reelected in these 2 races, even though they are of opposite party identifications. So Brian Kemp right now up by 5.1%. I think he can win by a likely margin. I do have Georgia as a likely Republican state right now. I do not think Stacey Abrams stands too much of a chance right now, even though she is the major Democrat in Georgia politics. She helped Joe Biden, John Ossoff, and Raphael Warnock win their 3 races in 2020 and 2021. Brian Kemp is just too popular, and of course, Georgia is also a state with a very long Republican history. Even though Biden won it in 2020, it was only by a margin of 0.23%, and that was in 2020. Democrats were up 7.5% nationwide, and Donald Trump was seen as a very weak Republican nominee. So with Brian Kemp in office right now, Democrats are probably not going to flip the governorship in Georgia. According to 538, Kemp has an 84% chance of winning, so actually lower than what I actually thought. But Stacey Abrams right now is not in that great of a position. If Stacey Abrams wants to win this race, she will have to take a lead in the polling average, and as of right now, it does not look like that's going to happen anytime soon. Moving on to Nevada, Steve Sisolak is being challenged by the Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Joe Lombardo leads by 2% in the most recent head-to-head poll against the incumbent Democrat. However, if you look at polls with all 4 candidates in the race, including the 2 moderate candidates, Steve Sisolak does lead by 3%. So a bit of a discrepancy here, but we do see that overall Nevada is going to be very, very competitive, just as competitive as Kansas, Arizona, or Wisconsin. And so right now, according to the polling average, Sisolak does maintain a 2.3% lead. I think that if Steve Sisolak wins re-election, Catherine Cortez Masto is going to win in the Senate as well. She is running against Adam Laxalt for a second term in Congress. And so both of these Nevada elections, I think that it's either both going to go to the Democrats or both going to go to the Republicans. Steve Sisolak was elected by 4% in 2018 against Adam Laxalt, the same Adam Laxalt that is now challenging Catherine Cortez Masto. And so the polls in 2018 were actually a bit off. They actually overestimated Republicans. If you look at the final polls, many polls showed Adam Laxalt actually winning. Some even had him up by 5%. Not many polls had Sisolak up by over 4 percentage points, and the final poll from Trafalgar had Laxalt leading by 2. So as of right now, in 2022, Steve Sisolak is still in a position where he has a good chance at winning re-election, but he is going to have to campaign very hard in the next 2 months to win a second term. In 2018, it was a much more favorable year for Democrats overall, but Nevada is still a state that slightly favors the Democratic Party, even though they are losing support from more and more Hispanic voters every year. So as of right now, as I made my prediction yesterday, I do have Nevada as a tilt Democratic state. I think that they do have a very slight advantage with Steve Sisolak running for re-election, but this race, just like Wisconsin, could very easily go both ways. According to 538, Nevada currently is a lean Democratic state. Steve Sisolak has a 64% chance at winning. His odds have been going up, but 64-36 statistically does not really mean too much. Joe Lombardo is still very much in this election. Next up, in Texas, we have a pretty old poll. This was from mid-June, so it's really not going to have an impact on the race right now. This poll showed Abbott up by 4% in the middle of the summer. So this is a pretty old poll that was just added a couple of days ago. Normally, polls are released pretty soon after results are tallied, but this poll, it took quite a while. This was a Democratic internal, so Better Works numbers would be boosted. But looking at the Texas race as a whole, Better Work is really not going to win this election, even though he came close to winning it in 2018 or the Senate race in 2018 against Ted Cruz. Greg Abbott is not Ted Cruz. Greg Abbott is much more popular than the Republican senator, and if you look at the most recent polls, Greg Abbott has been ahead in basically every single one of them. Better Work is not even coming close in any of these surveys, and so in 2018, Greg Abbott won his re-election pretty easily to a second term. He defeated Lupe Valdez with 55% of the vote. In 2022, I don't think it's going to be solid. Better Work is still a good Democratic candidate. He is probably the best Democrat the party could have nominated, but even Better Work is not enough to flip the governorship in Texas. Texas is still a very red state. It has not voted for a Democrat on the presidential level since all the way back in 1976. You have to go back to the election of Jimmy Carter to see a Democrat win in the Lone Star State. Since then, it has shifted to the left a little bit in the last couple of years. In 2020, Trump only won Texas by 5.6%. I don't think it's going to flip in 2028, but in 2032, Democrats do have a real shot at Texas if we consider there to be generic nominees in that election. So Texas is a state that is not trending well for Republicans. If you look at the overall shift in the state, you will see that in 2012, Mitt Romney won Texas by 15.8%, and he lost the presidential election with just 206 electoral votes. Trump did worse in 2016, 9%, and then 2020, most recently, again, 5.6%. So as of right now, I do have Texas still as a likely Republican state. 2022 is not going to be the year that Texas flips blue in any election statewide, and so as of right now, I do have Texas as a likely Republican state still, with Greg Abbott winning a third full term. And finally, you have 2 new polls from South Carolina and Colorado, both suggesting closer races than previously thought. In South Carolina, Henry McMaster only leads by 11% against Joe Cunningham, and if you look at the other poll that was released a couple of days ago from the Trafalgar group, McMaster only led by 8. So this suggests that McMaster is probably in a closer race than previously thought, and so that's why I have moved South Carolina into the likely Republican column. I don't think he's going to win by over 15% anymore, but I do think that it will be almost a guaranteed win for the Republican Party. He still has a 97% chance at winning re-election. So McMaster became governor of South Carolina in 2017 after Nikki Haley resigned to become the UN ambassador under the Trump administration. So Nikki Haley was eyeing a 2024 presidential run. However, since Trump lost the 2020 election, Nikki Haley's chances at becoming the nominee in 2024 have definitely decreased significantly, as of course Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are now the 2 frontrunners. And so in 2018, Henry McMaster won his re-election by around 8%. He's probably going to win it by double digits this time around, but I don't think it's going to be over 15% 5% anymore. So South Carolina, I've moved into the likely Republican column simply because of these two new polls showing some worrying numbers for McMaster. And the last poll we're going to look at today is from Colorado that shows Jared Polis ahead by 7%. So looking at the overall average, Polis is ahead by 9.7%. The two most recent polls have shown Polis only ahead by single digits. These are Republican internal polls, one by the Gonald campaign themselves, the one that we just looked at, and the other poll was conducted by the Trafalgar Group. So as we know, obviously these two polls are going to skew in favor of Gonald, but right now I do not think Jared Polis is going to win by a solid margin. I did have Colorado as a solid Democratic state for quite a while. I still think that Jared Polis is guaranteed to win re-election. He's the only openly gay governor in the entire country, but still, Jared Polis is probably not going to outperform his 2018 margin by too much. He only won by 10% 4 years ago. In 2016, he ran against Walter Stapleton. Walter Stapleton was a state treasurer and, of course, a Republican. Now, this time around, Heidi Gonald is the new nominee. She is pretty moderate, just like Joe Adea for the Senate election, but even though they are moderates, they're not going to be able to flip a state as blue as Colorado. So Colorado is going to remain in the Democratic column, but not as solid as before. And so this map really doesn't mean too much. I'm just filling these states based on what new polls are showing or my new classifications. But today we took a look at the most recent polls that have been released for the 2022 gubernatorial elections. Definitely some pretty surprising numbers. I think that these races are going to continue to become even more competitive as we enter the month of September and then October. Really, October is going to be, of course, the most important month. That's going to be the make or break for many of these candidates. We have very vulnerable Democrats and Republicans in many states. I mean, just look at these races. Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin going to be super competitive, as well as Kansas, with a Democratic incumbent running in a solid Republican state. We also have surprisingly close races in Oregon, New Mexico, as well as Maine to a certain extent, with Paul LePage as the former governor and Republican candidate. And then Pennsylvania, we're going to see a pretty interesting race between Josh Shapiro and the worst Republican nominee, in my opinion, that being Doug Mastriano. So thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below what you think about these new polls. Do you think that Lee Zeldin has a chance in New York? And do you think Tina Kotek is actually going to win the election in Oregon? And in the end, how many governorships do you think Democrats or Republicans are going to win? Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Also consider purchasing a channel membership for just 99 cents per month to gain extra perks on this channel as we enter the final 2 months until the midterms, and I'll see you guys in the next video.